In this video, we're going to turn our attention to something that's not a pleasant thought, but that's recovering or restoring the master database. Now, the master database serves really as the brain, if you will, for a SQL Server instance. Now, the way SQL Server was originally designed, everything about the databases that we work with are stored in some form in the master database. The master database contains all the system tables and various settings that are necessary for the database server to function. Now, there's kind of a new thought process because of the way cloud computing and virtual computing have changed the way we think about mobility, both with computers and virtual machines and individual applications. We're starting to see a trend toward what's called contained databases, where a database is self-contained and it doesn't have very many, if any, ties back to the master database. But for now, for traditional SQL Server, you still have a very strong relationship between the master database and the other functionalities and databases that are on your SQL Server. What happens when the master database becomes damaged in some form? It picks up some corruption, it's affected by malware, or something like that. First of all, we've talked about this earlier in the course, the master database should be backed up periodically, okay? It has all of this configuration information. We want to make sure we can get back to that very easily. So we need to back up the master database periodically as part of our regular backup program, but we also need to back it up after we've made any kind of significant modifications to our SQL Server or if we've applied any updates or anything like that to it. To restore the master database from a backup, you do this differently than you do standard user databases. What you're going to have to do is first start the SQL Server instance in single user mode. Now, what that means is if we were to restart our server, that we want it to start up in a format that says, hey, only one user can connect to this, and that's it. What we're going to do to put SQL Server into a single user mode is we're going to use the SQL Server Configuration Manager. There's a couple of ways to do this, the Configuration Manager and the SQL Server utility. So first, let's focus on the Configuration Manager. What you're going to do is you're going to open this, click on SQL Server Services, right-click on that SQL Server service in the right pane and choose Properties. And on the Startup tab, we're going to add a startup procedure -M. Don't worry, I'm going to show it to you in just a moment after we see it in the black and white here. Then we just simply restart the database engine. Strong note here, the SQL Server agent service is probably going to be running on a production machine because if we're doing any kind of data collection or a lot of other things, we have database maintenance plans that are running. Those are jobs that are created and they're on a schedule. The SQL Server agent is what manages all that stuff, so it's going to be running. But what we don't want to have happen is to set this thing into single user mode, and when it starts up, SQL Server agent uses our single connection, and then we still can't get in. So we have to go back and redo this. Let's walk through using that SQL Server Manager. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump out to the desktop. Again, I'm on a Windows 8.1 machine here, so I'm going to go down to the bottom section to the Apps section of the Start menu, and I'm going to go over here. Notice here's the SQL Server 2016 Configuration Manager. So I'll open this up, and UAC is going to ask me, am I sure I know what I'm doing? And I'm almost positive that I do. So we're going to let this open, and notice here is the SQL Server Configuration Manager. Well, notice if I click on SQL Server Services right here, and then I'm looking for SQL Server right here. Now, it will have in parentheses the name of your SQL Server instance. Well, I just want to right click on this, go down to Properties. Right here is a tab called Startup Parameters. I want to add -M, that should be a lowercase m. We're going to add it right there, and we'll just click Apply. And once we do that, we have added that startup parameter, okay? Notice it's saying that it's not going to take effect until the service is stopped and restarted. I say, okay, not a problem, all right? Now, if I stop and restart the service, we're going to start up SQL Server in a single user mode. Once I've worked with SQL Server, I've restored my master database, I'm going to come back out here, click on that and remove it and apply it again. So I'll click apply. This will take it off and it'll tell me I have to be stopped and restarted again. But if you remember the note out there, notice your SQL Server agent is running. This is going to create a connection to the database. We want to right click this and choose stop before we restart SQL Server. and we can look at properties here to see what's going on with this. Here's a start mode automatic, and I could tell that to just make it manual so that it doesn't start up, and then I can start up in single user mode, do what I need to do, come back out here and reconfigure this to turn it back off. So that's how you would do that. You can also use the SQL Server utility to start up in single user mode. And what you have to do is browse to the location of SQL Server executable file in a command prompt window. You're basically going to browse for SQL Server 2016, and I just installed it on my machine in the default standard location. Notice it's going to be the C drive, program files, then a folder called Microsoft SQL Server, then one called MSSQL13.MSSQL Server, and then you'll see a /MSSQL, and then you'll see a bin folder. Inside there, you'll see it. Now, let me just kind of jump out here right quick. And I want to show you something you need to be aware of. If I go to my C drive and go to Program Files, and then Microsoft SQL Server, here's my MSSQL13 MSSQL SQL Server. Well, notice there's an MSAS13. That's because I have analysis services running. Then there's MSAS13 Tabular, using tabular data services there. And then there's a SQL Express version. So you got to make sure you get the right one here. So I double click that, go into MSSQL, go into bin, and then if I come down here, you will see SQL Server. But I want to browse to this location in a command prompt window. And so I'll just execute SQL Server.exe-m, and that has set that up to start in single user mode. Then I'll just go through the process. Once I'm in single user mode and I start back up, I'll just connect in like normal. I'll restore the master database from a backup. Then I can just use the SQL Server configuration service to remove the M startup option when I'm done. And I've thrown a couple of resources out there in the working files folder to help you read up on this. First one is called Configure SQL Server Startup Options. Read through that to see about using these tools. And then there's one that gives you just a little bit more detail on Restore the Master Database. This whole master database restoration has historically been a popular topic on the exams. So this might be one to take a look at and get a little bit of hands-on with on your own SQL Server there. So that's a quick look at recovering the master database on SQL Server.